Hey guys, quick video this week. Normally I record these videos early in the morning, but the week got the better of me, so here I am on a Tuesday afternoon chatting with you, and I couldn't think of a better way to end my day. Because I'm kind of short on time, I figured this would be the perfect opportunity to record a video like this, and I'm hoping to turn this into a bit of a series because quite often I'm asked how to start a YouTube channel, how to start vlogging, how to start a podcast, and while I could direct you to a plethora of other videos and blog posts about this topic, I feel like there is a hole. I feel like there aren't many geared towards makers, towards crafters, towards, specifically knitters and sewers. So my goal is to tailor or fine-tune this topic for viewers like you who are looking to start their own crafty YouTube channel or audio podcast. Even if you already have one and want to up your game, I feel like I have some helpful tips and tricks that can take your recording to the next level, so to speak. So today's topic, I am going to be talking about my camera settings. If you're a returning viewer, you might notice that I have kind of like this cinema quality happening with my videos. You might notice that I usually have a very shallow depth of field in the background or a very creamy, blurry background, also known as bokeh. And that's because I set my camera a specific way to achieve this sort of look. So let me get into that if you are curious. I just want to preface this by saying that there's no right or wrong way to record a vlog or a video. Whatever you have at your disposal is your best camera. As long as you have good video, good audio quality, you are gold. But again, these tips that I share with you here are if you want to take your recording and skills to the next level when it comes to recording your videos. So let's get into it. First step is to set your camera to manual mode, and this will allow you to fine-tune and tweak things to your fancy. After you set your camera to manual mode, you'll want to go into settings and adjust your frame rate. I like to shoot at 24 frames per second. 24 frames per second is the cinematic industry standard. This was something that was established back in the 1920s, and digital cameras are able to mimic that frame rate. But you'll notice there may be other options. So your camera might only come with 30 frames per second. If that's the case, go with 30 frames per second. That is going to be the closest to 24 frames per second, and you should achieve a similar cinematic-like quality. So once you have your frame rate set to either 30 or 24 frames per second, the next thing is key. You'll want to exit out of your settings and adjust your shutter speed. Now, if you are recording at either 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second, the shutter speed you are going to want to choose is double the amount of your frame rate. So if you are working with 30 frames per second, you're going to want to choose a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second. 60 is double of 30. Genius. So complicated. However, if you're working with 24 frames per second, 24 times 2 is 48. So you'll notice there's no 1/48th of a second available for you to choose from. So what you do is you round up. So I set my shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. So once you have this set, that is what's going to give you this nice kind of flowy cinematic look to your video recording. But there's one last tip. If you want this shallow depth of field where you get the nice creamy blurry background bokeh effect, for this you will want to adjust your f-stop. So you are going to want to open up your aperture as wide as it possibly can. And right now I'm working with a wide lens, the Sony Sigma 16mm lens, and this one opens all the way up to f1.4, which is brilliant for low light. Some other cameras only open to f2.8 or f4. Whatever camera you're working with, you want to open up your aperture as wide as possible. This is what's going to give you that depth of field that you're looking for. The one thing you might notice when you're working with such a low aperture, immediately your image is going to blow out. So the one way to remedy that is to adjust your ISO. And this is another part of the exposure triangle. Shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, or ISO as they call it. And pro tip, ISO is the very last thing you want to touch as a photographer. You want to keep your ISO as low as possible and only increase it if you absolutely need to, because the higher your ISO, the more grain and noise will be introduced. And unless that's a look you're going for, usually it's not very desirable. So you want to keep your ISO as low as possible. And when I'm recording my videos or taking photos, the highest I usually go is between 400 and 600. Right now I am recording at ISO 500, so there you go. But yes, if you do stop all the way down to, let's say an f.4 and your image is completely overexposed, definitely make sure that your ISO or ISO is as low as it can possibly go with you still being decently exposed, if that makes sense. Again, the exposure triangle is a delicate balance, but just to recap, whatever frame rate you're shooting at, you'll want to double that to figure out your shutter speed. So 30 frames per second gets 1/60th of a second, 24 frames gets 1/50th of a second, and depending on the type of camera you have, you might notice that there are different frame rates available. So you might have a camera that has 60 frames per second. This camera that I'm shooting on has that, including 120 frames per second, and you're wondering, Kristen, what are those possibly for? Well, my friends, those are for slow motion. Another topic for another day, but at the end of the day, the same rule applies. You always want to double your frame rate to figure out your shutter speed. So I hope you guys found that helpful and entertaining. And again, I will be back with more tutorials on how to start your own vlog, your own podcast, YouTube channel. If this is something that interests you, let me know in the comments below any questions you have, and I will endeavor to create a video about it. But yeah, I will be back later on this week with a knitting podcast because again, I have not had any time to sew this week. But again, if you are vlogging and have a YouTube channel about knitting or sewing or whatever craft you're into, I hope this helps up your production quality, or you've learned something new, or if you're thinking about starting one, hopefully these tips show that you can get really nice quality video with the camera gear that you already have. So I will leave it there. I will see you on the next video, which is actually going to be another knitting episode, because I will be totally honest, I have had no time to sew these past couple of weeks, and I'm missing it so much. But I will be back soon with another sewing episode, I promise, guys, very soon. I feel good about this weekend. I have some sewing coming down the pike. So anyway, that said, happy knitting, happy sewing, happy making, happy vlogging, and I will see you on the next video. Bye!